Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes done on 28th of April 2020. Today, we're going to explore the state of CTO and technical leadership roles in an ecosystem overshadowed by COVID-19 and quarantine, with views from a current searcher, a founder looking for a CTO, and a head of a boutique CTO placement firm. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community numbers are over 1,000, providing one-on-one coaching, mentoring groups, online communities, and events like this one. This is a sensitive topic, so we'd like to remind everyone that there is a code of conduct available on the CTO Craft website, and that all discussions and questions here will be treated as strictly confidential under the Chatham House rules. So introductions. So myself, I'm Glyn. I'm the moderator of this Byte session. I'm the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. With us today, we have Timothy Kimball, former CTO at Aire Labs and currently searching for a new CTO role. So Timothy, could you give yourself a short intro, please?
Hi, hello. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my experiences. Yeah, so I've been working in technology for over like 25 years now, getting close to 30. And the last 10 of those, the last 12 of those years have been in a senior leadership role, CTO style role, in a startup environment. So usually companies that are usually around 40 and about 30 people, maybe on maximum that I've managed so far. Really learned a lot in that time, doing lots and lots of fun stuff, but recently have found myself looking for that next opportunity. And one of the things that's really interesting is like, it's not my full-time job, has not been my full-time job finding a job as a CTO. And there is a lot of complexity to finding that role that I had not anticipated or I did not really understand. And so it's been a learning curve and there's a lot of interesting nuances to it. One of them is that these roles aren't advertised. Like you're not going out and applying to job sites or advertisements or very rarely are you doing that. It's much more network-based, much more heavy reliance on boutique search firms like James. And they play a much more important role. I think that's the other thing I realized. You know, normally my relationship with the recruiter is as they're my vendor. I'm using them to help me find and source great candidates. They are not someone that I'm not often the candidate being placed. And I think it's a big difference between working with a boutique search firm like James and Albany versus working with a recruiter who's really helping you hire software engineers. So it's been really interesting, like getting my head around all of that.
Excellent. Well, great to have you here, Timothy. Also on the webinar today is we've got Bill Dobie, who's the CEO at SEDNA Systems, currently searching for CTO for his business. So Bill, could you give us a short intro as well, please?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me here today. It's nice to see you guys again. I've been in technology for about 20 years, and this is my third software startup. Originally from Vancouver, but I've lived in London the last 10 years or so. And I've primarily been working in software around commodities and global trading and supply chain. And I had a startup which I sold in around 2010, or exited that business. And then for the last few years, I've been working mostly on helping companies kind of ascertain the truth about their transactions. And SEDNA is a software product that allows the execution system to connect to the communication stream that a company uses to make their deals, and it links those two together. We were I'm a technical, originally a programmer, originally a product builder. I wouldn't claim to be in any way highly technical now, but I have a technical product background, and with a really strong engineering team, we've been going on for about the last year and a half or so without a CTO. A really fantastic head of technology has been driving things, but we're now in a process with James Firm, actually post our Series A, which we completed a couple months ago, looking to bring in a CTO to help us guide the organization technically to the next iteration. So looking forward to this chat today, and it is a very strange time. I was all just admiring how long our hair is getting. Well, at least you guys are, rather than me. But yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And so thanks very much, Bill. And the third person on the group is James Goodrich, founder at Albany Partners and a boutique CTO placement firm. Anyone that's been looking for roles inside London probably already run into James a few times. So James, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. And thanks again also for introducing and inviting me today. So for those who don't know me, James Goodrich, I run Albany. We're a CTO search firm specialising in moving CTOs and VPs of engineering to high growth tech businesses in Europe. We have moved some CPOs also, but we're very, very niche. We're a team of 10 based in Holborn, although currently remote working, as many of you are. I spent 20 years in search, and the last 9 of which have been focused in this area. We typically move 40 odd candidates a year, and we've worked across Europe and the UK. I'd say the even split between B2B versus consumer. Salaries are somewhere kind of 140 plus up to about 220 on the venture side, and kind of 160 upwards to about 300-400 on the private equity side. Proud father of 2 young girls that drive me mad at the moment. Mainly my wife's responsibility, and I live in Buckinghamshire. But thank you for inviting me today.
Nice. Great to see you here. Okay, then, great. We'll save time at the end of the event for everyone that's joining us to ask their own questions. So there's an ask a question button at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to ask your questions there. And at the end, we'll get through as many as we can. Also, we've also got a poll in here asking you about the current team sizes you're managing. We're going to be following this talk up with roundtables. So for smaller groups, 10, 12 people, to be able to talk amongst themselves about the problems they're facing like this. So if you could help us complete the poll, it would help us identify what team sizes we should be basing those roundtables into. So let's talk about getting a senior leadership role during the current climate. First question I've got, we'll start with Timothy. So how do you normally find a CTO position, and what have you had to change with your approach with the situation that we're in right now?
Yeah, so I guess the word normal is interesting, because I don't think you find yourself trying to find one normally, and that it's not something you're doing on a regular basis. So it's definitely been a learning curve, just figuring out, well, how do you get a role normally as a CTO, and that, again, as I was mentioning in my introduction, the process isn't clear, and there's a lot of networking involved, a lot of discussions, a lot of talking to lots and lots of different people. My role right now is I talk to anyone at any time about anything, and just a kind of a broad, what's out there, what's going on, what opportunities exist, how do I fit in, what is what's good about my background, what do I need to emphasize, what do I need to work on in terms of helping people understand maybe parts of my experience that aren't exactly aligned with the needs of the organizations out there. So it's a lot of networking, lots and lots of conversations with people, and going through my LinkedIn profile, going through all my contacts, and being willing to just reach out to anyone and everyone and just, hey, let's have a chat. What's going on? I think one thing that's been really great about COVID is people are more willing to do that. Like it's a time when for whatever reason, people are much more willing to get on the phone and our Zoom call and have a conversation and just talk about anything, really. Talk about the COVID situation, talk about how you're coping with things. And it's been really gratifying to learn a lot. I've learned a lot, actually, in the last 2 months just through that process, about what's going on in the startup industry, what are people looking for CTOs, what processes look like, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that. That's been really different. So definitely heavily network-based. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And Bill, what has been your experiences so far with the volume and quality of the candidates that you've seen since quarantine has started?
I mean, I think to Timothy's point, I too am, just to touch on it briefly, I'm surprised and really happy about the willingness of people to engage really deeply virtually. A lot of these preconceived notions have kind of been smashed, and taking it back to your question, we were already fairly, I guess, midway through our process with James before the crisis, and then I guess 4 or 5 weeks ago it's really kicked off, and I would say we are seeing. I think Albany's been driving a very high quality list of people through our process so far. I would say that I've seen an increasing number of more technical candidates coming our way, as well as some fintech as well, is obviously a big focus in London generally. And you know, I must admit, this is my first time hiring a CTO like this. I'd kind of usually had like a co-founder CTO or a technical co-founder before. And I'm surprised at the scale of people available in London, you know, and a wide range of experience, more venture experience than I expected, actually, in the London market, at least. And I think, you know, we had to deal with our own organization, you know, strategic planning issues. You know, how are we going to react to the crisis? You know, what's our runway going to look like? You know, what's our strategic investments going to look like? And so there was kind of a temporary pause in our efforts around this search, but that hasn't stopped candidates coming through. And in fact, now that we're really re-upping it again, I think we're very confident we're going to find a great candidate, even though it's going to be almost virtually or almost all remote right now. And I think you know, I'm feeling fairly bullish about it.
Fantastic. Okay, great. And from James, have you noticed a decrease in the amount of roles available, and have you had to change the way that you promote these roles during the current time?
Yes, we have. And related to that, we've seen a significant increase in the number of candidates actually coming down to market and reaching out to us. We're seeing a heavily polarized market. So, you know, you have industries that are being hit really hard, like travel and leisure, entertainment, restaurants, and any tech related to that. But we're also seeing markets growing significantly. So anything that's enabling home working, tech is on the rise. E-commerce companies are growing to support them. We are actually supporting a company in Manchester called Sorted. And they manage the delivery options for online customers. So businesses that are related to e-commerce are growing. Super exciting B2B SaaS companies like Bills that are using this opportunity to catch up and grow through this period. So there are companies that are still growing. We're seeing a lot of growth in the mental health sector, which is obviously the outcome of this situation. Clients like Unmind, and we're actually working with a business called IESO, based in Cambridge. So we are seeing quite a polarized market. You then map onto that the investment cycle of those companies, and that then changes it again completely. So businesses that have raised money before this virus are acting like they are in a growth market. So we actually just have moved a CTO into the travel industry in Berlin, but they raised £22 million in December. So that, you know, they're seeing this as a great chance to grow and scale their operation. We have heard that there's a reduction in the amount of new investments, and that will have a direct impact on the amount of roles we see. Because we often follow a series A or B, and couple that with the amount of candidates that are hitting the market, obviously will reduce the amount of roles we do see as well. So, interesting fact we picked up on, but Sifted did a survey. They've seen a 43% reduction in the number of roles across the board, and the number of available candidates double. But I do believe that tech is a little bit more insulated. And as a search firm, when this crisis kicked off, the first thing I was concerned about is obviously the amount of roles that we had active that would go on hold. I'm pleased to say not a single role did. And if you talk to my counterparts in sectors where they're generalists and they look after other roles, they would say they saw a 50% pull rate of their mandates. So that suggests to me that the tech can survive in the shadows and is insulated and protected. So whilst I have seen a reduction in roles, I am quite positive and bullish about still seeing. We signed 3 mandates in the last 5 weeks during this period. So I'm expecting that to continue and that's hopefully for big as well.
Excellent. And while you're discussing your experience here, James, what do you normally have to consider when a CTO applies for a role? Essentially, have you having to change anything here? Like, what's your normal process for this?
So when a CTO applies to the role, amazingly, the number one thing that a CTO looks for in a job is their relationship with their CEO. So culture is a key one. You know, how they come across on the phone and on video calls is paramount. Historically, when you look at a CTO's skill set, you have a long list of key criteria. And over the last 3 years or so, that's changed drastically to be focused on kind of 5 or 6 key areas. And I would say those are stage of journey. So where is the business today and where does it need to get to in the next 2 to 3 years? And someone that's been through that journey before. So it's about understanding from the CTO where their sweet spot is and what they want to be doing. Team size is a big one, as you mentioned, Tim. So how many people have you managed up to? How many people have you grown the team to and from? Experiencing hiring in the market that you serve. Obviously, that's changed significantly now with the distributed engineering teams. That was a popular request ahead of this period, and it's going to be a more important request. So somebody that's managed distributed engineering teams is going to be a very useful skill, and one I would suggest you get if you don't have. Whether you're more the consumer side or B2B side, and the level of complexity around that, whether it's a regulated environment. Sometimes there's a requirement for kind of heavy data element of the business, which is quite common, and whether you need to have experience of that kind of AI, ML experience. But normally we find that if someone is heavy on the data science side, then they're less strong on the engineering kind of team leadership side. And that's normally the first and foremost requirement for most of our mandates. Whether the business is tech enabled or tech focused, and obviously that would dictate how technical the candidate is. And the big one is probably whether they manage products or not. More and more we are seeing clients that are trying to combine the CTO role and CPO role into kind of a CTPO role. Yeah. And then there's sometimes a requirement for commercial, and how commercial are they? But that again, if you're heavy on the commercial side, you might not be as strong on the technical side. But I would still, the paramount one is cultural fit, team alignment, how you come across, maturity, gravitas, intelligent questioning, structured answering is probably my advice.
Excellent. And Timothy, so what would you look for in a CTO role? What's the key things that you try to pay attention to?
So I think definitely, when I look at the organization, certainly the relationship with the CEO, the executive team, and how it's set up, and how healthy is that. And then also, I'm thinking a lot about the vision, mission, and purpose of the business, and the intentionality in which they treat their people. So, being a technical leader in a startup environment or a venture-backed business, you're often leading one of the biggest parts of the organization. And the better the culture is, the stronger the leadership is, the more effective I can be at my job. And the less I'm, being this mediator between the technology organization and the rest of the business, and the more we're all operating together as one unit and moving forward. So I really think a lot about the culture, the vision, the mission, and the purpose of the business, because I think that's an environment where I can be really effective inside of. And it's a joy to go work there. It's something I want to get out of bed and I get really excited about. So I'm looking for that in the conversations that I'm having with businesses. And then I'm really looking to make sure that it's a role I'm going to be able to make a difference in, that there's some meat to the bone, and it's something I'm going to be excited about, that I can see myself adding value, but also is going to help me grow as a leader and as a professional in this business. I don't want to go and do something I've already done before and learn nothing. I want to get something meaningful out of the experience. So it's kind of that kind of nexus of all of those things that I look for.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, so what was the criteria you landed on when you was creating your selection process for the CTO role?
I think from our point of view, my understanding is when a company does a raise like we did, and we were on a fairly high growth trajectory last year, there's almost two types of CTO hires that a board or the investors and the leadership like ourselves go after. One is you're kind of dealing with a burning platform and you have a number of engineering problems. And the other is really you're kind of, you don't have that situation, which is our case. And you're really more looking for what's the future of your platform look like. And first and foremost, I mean, for us and and the criteria we developed with James, we were looking for a leader for our engineers. So someone to give them a picture of what their career roadmap would look like, their technical growth roadmap. That was really a key part of what we've been missing as we've been growing quickly in the business. So I think the primary criteria for us is someone with that experience leading engineers on their own development, and some alignment between the candidate and me, that obviously the engineers are the one doing the work. So it's really our job as leaders to find out how they're going to do their best work. And so that's been a part of it. There has been the fairly standard, it would be helpful, useful to have someone join the business who has been on a fairly high growth path before. So that I think is some for entrepreneurs like myself who have mostly, even my prior business was more of an EBITDA business. I've not necessarily dealt with venture scale, some of those technical challenges, rapid increase in customers or user volumes, and some of the concordant technical issues that raises. I think having someone who has that kind of experience, not necessarily team size, but complexity size, I think that's an important part. That's also, rather selfishly for me, I'm looking for someone I can learn from so that I can make sure that we're kind of injecting the right kind of capital allocation into how we grow the technical side of the business next. I think the experience is useful, where we are looking for people who've had some patterned success already, and then they can bring that over and drop that DNA inside of our business. Same sort of thing like Timothy is saying. I think cultural fit, fit is the wrong word, but I think some clear alignment between the CTO and the wider management team as the kind of the way we want to work and the way we motivate people. I'm generally believe that, that effort is not the sole indicator of outcome, of progress or ability. It's really about how efficient and how thoughtful you can complete your work. And at SEDNA, we try to be really outcome driven. How are we making the users work faster? Are we making the customers complete their deals faster? And so we kind of want a CTO who's optimizing for the performance of our team and not necessarily trying to just squeeze more out of them, if that makes sense. I will say, James is right. My first startup, we were, installing hardware and data centers, and everyone knows obviously the universe is so utterly changed with the cloud. I mean, we take so many of these things really for given, as a given now. So we're more interested in, what will be, what kind of discussions the CTO might want to have with our kind of Fortune 50 clients, how we fit into that strategy. So I think we're looking for someone who's probably less technical minded and more architectural minded from a strategic point of view. I will say our selection process too, we've probably eased a little bit on all of those standards, and not to lower the standards in any way, but because our understanding of how the year is going to progress is not as high speed as we thought it would be. We are also very interested in candidates who might be leveling up. So before, where the investors and ourselves would have insisted you've got to have this tier candidate, I think now we're kind of looking for people who are close to getting to that next level, because we'll have the time to grow with them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as we are touching on the interviewing and process around that, James, how have you had to change the way you validate and interview applicants? Mute. Yeah.
Thank you. Just before I do, I just want to just to touch on Bill's point and Tim's point. I think it's a really interesting one, is that if clients are looking for CTOs that have been there, done it, and Tim, candidates are not looking to do the same journey again, there's a problem right there. And a lot of what we do is educating a client on, I want someone that's taken a business from here to here. Okay, we'll look at the profile of the candidate that took that company from A to B, and that candidate hadn't done that job. So, and Bill's is lovely to hear you say that, Bill, because you understand that actually it's better to have someone in the role that is having their definitive role. That's the trick. So for anyone that's listening out there that's thinking, how do I get that experience if I haven't got it? You will find somebody that sees the opportunity and potential in you, and that you've got the start of that journey to carry on. So just to say. In terms of how you change the way you validate and interview applicants, it hasn't changed significantly. We can do a lot of interviewing via Zooms and Hangouts and every other video conferencing platform quite effectively. Because of our specialism, we know a lot of the CTOs, so we actually have met them historically, so we have a feel for them in person. So typically we're only interviewing them for a specific role or specific skill versus a kind of general interview. The big question for us is with new clients coming through now is, are they able to make a decision without having met the CEO or the candidate? And that's a big decision. You know, some clients are saying absolutely no problem. Some are hoping that the lockdown will end so that they can shake their hand. But validation of experience can come across perfectly well on Zoom and video conferencing. So short answer to that is no, it's quite effective.
Okay, great. And for Bill, I assume that everything's now happening remotely as well for you. Essentially, how are you approaching the screening interview process from a CEO perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, we always take our first discussion with the potential candidate as giving them a chance to qualify us. So we're probably seeing a fairly groomed list that we're getting from James when we start interviewing them, and so we tend to spend the first probably maybe even a little bit too long, the first hour actually telling the candidate about us. So, you know, why does the company exist, and also what SEDNA is. We have a marketing challenge. And we're working on that as well. And it's not quite what it appears. And we usually walk the candidate through our Series A financing deck. So why did we think that this business is suitable for capital in this way? And how do we see the journey that we're going on to build that? And I, you know, I'm hopeful that for the candidate, it's a way for them to get a full sense of, okay, this is why they're looking to hire me. And so we spend a fair bit of time talking, I think, and then leaving it back to them to kind of come back for us the second time. I would say, you know, I am surprised at how deep we're able to get the conversation so far at my level. One of the worries I've got about the process is, I think all of you as CTOs now, you know, like you're coming into a company and there's going to be, you know, lots of good things that are working. That's why the company's in business still or thriving right now. There's also going to be a bunch of things that aren't working and you know, technical debt or however you want to phrase that. I think it's really important that as the CEO, I try to communicate the actual state of play as much as possible with the incoming candidates. So their expectations and what they want to work on is aligned with us. I am worried about how we communicate that at scale, right? How, you know, that could have more easily have been done with a group interview, a visit to the office, a discussion, some random interaction with the developer who's grumpy about something. And that is, I don't quite know how we're going to replicate that as we continue with the process. But, you know, for now, everyone's really up for remote. We're allocating more time. I'm actually finding we're spending more time on the Zooms than we were in person. Can't tell if that's good or bad. And really, I always assume it's going to be at least 2 discussions before we even know if we're progressing, because I think it's about us downloading to the candidate, hey, this is what we're about. You might be interested, and are you interested in the problem set that we're presenting? You know, we need product, and you know, we need our product to be evolved and built. We don't necessarily need product strategy, and so that's kind of explaining those parameters. And then the second, you know, interview is really more about us getting to know the candidate. But so far, I personally think we're going to get to a decision point almost all entirely remote, as long as we solve the, you know, what's under the rock problem.
Sure. Okay, great. And Timothy, what are the main issues you're seeing as a CTO looking to hire, obviously having to go through a remote process during that recruitment stage?
So I think part of it is, of course, honestly, the thing I struggle with a little bit in terms of understanding it relative to COVID or not is I haven't really been through this process at this scale before, right? Previous roles I had through my network, or I was a founder, etc., and so I ended up in the role that way. Yeah. Now I'm actually actively searching for a leadership role. So I can't really parse how much of this is COVID and how much of this is the very nature of trying to find a leadership role and the challenges associated with it. What I will say is, for CTO and VP of Eng roles, it's a long process. You know, if you're the first person they've spoken with, my experience is they're going to speak with a number of other people. and they're still figuring out what they want. There's only one of these roles in their organization. They may have never hired this role before, right? This may be a completely new thing for them in terms of understanding, well, what is this role? How does it fit in? How do we know what good looks like? And so they're going to need to speak with a lot of different people a lot of different candidates before they're going to get their heads and their arms around that problem. So from a candidate experience, it looks like, wow, that was a great conversation. And then it's kind of silence for a while they go in and speak with lots and lots of people. And then you go through, okay, then you go to your second round and then your third round. And every step of the way, things are going to change, right? Their understanding of what they need is going to change. There could be changes on the market side. Funding could fall through. All of these things could happen, especially in this kind of, Series A, Series B world where there's a bit more risk. So that's most of my experience, and what I've been wrestling with is that uncertainty and trying to understand and figure out how I should address that, what I should do what can I do to improve my chances as a candidate, basically. In terms of the interviews themselves, I think there's been some real benefits to this remote approach in that you're more likely to get a meeting and a conversation, and you can have more of them with less risk because you can have them back to back.
Right.
I even had situations where I'm in an interview and I have to end it because I have another interview with a completely different company, and that would normally never happen because normally you'd be on site and you can spend that extra time with them, and you want to spend that extra time with them if they want to make it available to you. But yeah, so there is that interesting logistical issue, which is you could be back to back with 3 different companies in the same day, one after the other in terms of interviews. So there's that to wrestle with as well. But I would say, parsing it all together for these senior roles, I think you have to be very patient and understand the complexity on the other side of the conversation is pretty high in terms of the decision they're making, and be willing to stick it out. And yeah.
And can I come back to that just on that a little bit, Glyn, or do we have time?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I also think there's sort of those. It is the most important hire. I think we're software companies, right? And so that this is actually, I think it should be extraordinarily difficult to go through the process and find the right person, because it's really, and especially at this sensitive stage where you may be attracting someone from what is already a stable job or bringing them into a new job in quite an uncertain environment. And I will say, for all the people who are looking for work, I speaking for myself and others, at least I don't want to speak for other CEOs per se, but the pressure or the complexity that we're having to process because of our inability to plan forward is like nothing I've ever dealt with. I'm used to working. We're mostly in the shipping commodity markets, and those are always up and down and weird, and oil's gone to zero and all this stuff. But I mean, we simply cannot make plans for really 6 months out because no one has any idea what that's going to look like. But we have to architect a business that will be stable and grow. And the amount of investor input we've had to absorb, we've had to rethink, leadership team organization. Even though we are well funded, we've made some redundancies. All of this has happened in like the last 2 weeks. Right. And so it's like this huge volume of input, while simultaneously, hey, we really need to make this key hire. And if I can rather selfishly say, also, there might be an opportunity to find a great hire in this process because people are leaving companies that for no other reason than the crisis are suddenly not on the same path. And so I feel the motivation to try and keep these interviews and stuff going. But yeah, I think patience, Timothy, is spot on. It's so weird out there right now.
It's a weird, there's the people there's the organizations that are responding to try to make sure they have the runway and the time and are having to make some difficult choices. There are also organizations who are growing like crazy right now, who are equally in crisis because they're finding platform issues, they're finding things aren't as scalable as they want, they're finding it hard to absorb all the growth.
Yeah.
And so a lot of their strategic roles go on pause just because they've got this burning fire in front of them due to demand.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, great. And James, how would you recommend CTOs approach compensation negotiations in light of COVID-induced changes, business objectives, hiring strategies, and funding opportunities? unmute you.
Thank you. I would say similar to how they have been historically. If a company is hiring a CTO, then they have the investment to make that hire, and the intention of scaling their business. So I would not suggest you reduce your compensation expectations because of the virus. What I would say is, though, if historically it's in the 6 months ago, trying to find a good CTO to get in a role, it was extremely difficult. And as a result of that, the CTOs were using that opportunity to hike up their salaries a little bit and punch. So which left the client in a position where they either had to make the decision to make that hire or they didn't, and then they had to reduce the quality potentially. So I would just say, if you are going to punch, just be very careful, because there are other candidates now available in the market that will take. So I would say just be careful at trying to push too high. The other thing I would say to this question is, I do have CTOs that are at the point where they are willing to reduce their salary quite significantly because of either their circumstance or situation. Whilst you might think that makes you a more attractive proposition, it actually, for headhunters at least, it gives me concern that you are as good as you could be. So my suggestion to you is hold tight, hold steady, and you are worth what you're worth, and hold your ground is my advice to you. But when people show a degree of flexibility, if you want to, tie it to the risk element. So what some conversations I have with people is, look, I'm really prepared to take I'm prepared to take a salary from 100 to 200k. And you could say, well, that's showing vulnerability, but actually it's depending on the package. If somebody's willing to offer me a larger stake of equity, I have a personal circumstance that I don't need to pay for school fees and the mortgage and everything else. I can actually take more of a chance on the element of the risk, and actually that sometimes appeals to the CEO because they feel that you believe in their proposition. So that's the only scenario where I would suggest you reduce your compensation to support your application.
Okay, fantastic. All right, great. So I'm on to my last question. We've already got 8 questions from the audience, so I'll get through to them shortly. So this question will be directed at all 3 people. So given the high percentages of engineering teams that will be working remotely for the foreseeable future, how can CTOs demonstrate their competence in managing a distributed team? So if we could start off with Bill, what would you be looking for in this sense?
I mean, for us, we are definitely much more open to remote work than we probably were before. And as a company, we're based in London and Vancouver, and so we've always had we've always had to deal with the West Coast, which is actually quite an ugly time zone to deal with. We're looking for someone who has dealt, with keeping engineering teams who are not based around senior leadership deeply engaged in the company. I'm really of the view that you measure outcome and you measure that people are engaged and happy at work. And the key for their leader, I think, for the CTO, is to be connected with the things that are going to motivate the engineers who are remote, which right now is everyone. I'm interested to hear those stories. I'm not a huge fan of, I ran this kind of outsourced team or that type of thing. We're looking for someone who's led, remote people are core members of our company. Where they live is kind of secondary to that. And the same sort of thing, if they're in Vancouver or here, we want someone who has experience around keeping them as part of the core, and probably in a way that's newer than it new for me. What do my investors tell me? The CEO's job is to be a parrot, right? Repeat the vision, the story, why we're here. I actually think this is now the job of the CTO, right? This is why you're working on this. This is why it matters to the strategic outcome of the company. This is why this sort of culture or approach or safety or security is important. And they're actually going to have to do that again and again and again, because engineers they obviously cover a wide range of personalities and types, but they could, if they're not deeply experienced with remote work, which some of ours aren't, they could easily feel on the outside looking in. And so, I'm really looking for someone who I can connect with remotely, and then I'm hopeful that they can carry that into connecting remotely themselves. I don't necessarily know that they have to have broad experience in it, for what it's worth. This moment is creating all kinds of new skills in people. Yeah.
Sure. And Timothy, what would you be focusing on with answering this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there's part of me, I have led remote teams. One of the most difficult was probably one back in New Zealand, which is like 12-hour time difference. Which is quite tricky to get right. I would say I would focus more on the basics of building a good relationship with people. And yeah, sure, remote, there are some interesting logistical challenges, building a remote first culture and thinking about how you level the playing field, being really empathetic to someone's ability to contribute when they are at a disadvantage, so making sure you're leveling that playing field as much as you can, or at least making sure everyone's sensitive to, if you've got one person remote and the entire team's in a conference room, for example, that you're doing everything you can to make sure that person is able to participate. But I think fundamentally it's about building relationships and those one-to-one conversations, really making sure you're building a connection with that other person, and you understand what's going on, and you understand what's motivating them, and you're having those difficult conversations, and so that you can get a feel for what's going on, right? And I think that's really crucial, whether you're remote or whether you're not remote. And I think the challenge, the thing you have to overcome as a leader is thinking that they're over there, right? They're not here. And you got to see past that, and you got to really make sure you know what's going on in that part of the business, right? And I think that's where one-to-ones are really, really valuable and important, and they're a key tool for every leader in a business. And that the content of those one-to-ones is giving you meaningful information and helping you understand what needs to happen. And every organization is going to be different in that regard, right? The challenges are all going to be unique because the people are unique, and you've just got to be willing. The key challenge is getting that information, right? Understanding what's going on. And there has to be trust to get that. To get high quality information about what's going on, you have to have trust. They have to know that you're going to use that information wisely, and that you're going to be responsible with that information. And I think that's the foundation. And then, yeah, remote definitely may make that harder. It also, I think, makes it slightly easier because people are in an environment that they find comfortable now, right? If they're at home, they're working from home, they're in an environment where they're maybe a little bit more unguarded and they're more willing to talk about things versus like a conference room that you checked out for 20 minutes for a chat, right? So I think there's some things that actually go to that are maybe advantageous about being remote in terms of creating that intimacy. So yeah, I mean, that's what I think about.
Great. And James, anything else you think that should be added to this?
Not a lot. I think you guys have covered it off really well. The only thing I would say is that I think it's quite important if you do have time difference is the big key, and managing the continuity. I would say that experience of implementing leaders in the regions where you're not is quite helpful if there's a big group of people. In some cases, we are asked where the CTO has, where the engineering team is based, say 90-80% of the engineering team is all based in one location, and they have a couple somewhere else. And a client says to us, look, we're happy to hire a CTO, but we don't necessarily need them on site. They can be located elsewhere. CTOs actually don't like that because they're fine with managing a distributed engineering team, but if 80% or plus is in one location, which they're not, it's very, very hard to manage. So that's my image.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, then. So let's get on to the attendees' questions then. So the first question we're going to ask has already got 7 votes up. So essentially it's highly sought after. Question for James. You touched on this on the CTO having to balance a technical expertise and a managerial one, and it feels normal. How would you recommend approaching this as a candidate? My experience is that credentializing the CV with tech skills is often viewed as a junior CV, with recruiters quick to pigeonhole you in you have to either be a techie or a leader.
Thanks for the question. I would say with the roles that we represent, so that's kind of VP of Engineering and CTO, north of 140K basic. Your specific technical experience in terms of coding languages, frameworks, et cetera, is pretty irrelevant. So I certainly wouldn't lead with that on your CV. 95% of the mandates we represent require someone with a technical background. How could you have a CTO or VP of Engineering managing a team of engineers that can code if you can't or haven't to date? I would say that your engineering leadership experience is what you should lead with versus your technical capability, unless you're the CTO of DeepMind or a very, very technical organization where it's all about your technical ability. In most cases, the roles we see are engineering first, best practices, as Bill said, getting the best out of the team of people. How does Bill feel comfortable knowing that person has got the best out of that team and they're all happy and working efficiently? And that's the key. So I would stay away from highlighting your exact technical experience and focus more on figures around how you've grown a team. What engineers think of you, what have you accomplished when it comes to team growth, size, and achievements.
I mean, can I add a point to that? I mean, I think any sufficiently technical CEO should understand, how software gets built, and from our point of view, we have very strong engineers. We're looking for someone to lead them, right? And ultimately, in leading, it's about unblocking them so that they can be successful. And so their technical knowledge is important only insofar, at least from my point of view, that when they're unblocking a problem or trying to shape how they can help that person or team perform better, that they understand that what's being told to them is the real problem. This is not because the engineering team is lying to them about what the real problem is, but they may lack the experience to articulate that. So by all means, I mean, we're the same. We wouldn't want to disrupt the coding or the architectural choices of our principal engineers, but we do need a leader who can understand, hey, I'm having this problem, I think it's this, and he can kind of walk them over to, actually it's probably this, and I have the experience to help you shape that. I will say, and I saw the comment on the question about CVs and stuff too, I wish CVs spent much more time talking about the problems they solved rather than what they accomplished, because of course I think it's important to understand what someone has done, but I'm well aware of what you have to be good at in order to get to a certain place. I'm personally very interested in how you problem solved and what necessarily you couldn't fix, you couldn't salvage, but how you approach that problem. And I think that that's a real part of the CV story that gets missed and sort of sets apart the junior versus the not junior CV from my point of view. Well, obviously you need to be technical, but by all means you're not programming anymore. Yeah.
I want to add something too, just from a candidate perspective, because the first thing I had to do when I left Aire was write a CV, and I hadn't written a CV in 5 years. And I was like, well, what do you put on this thing? I have 5 years of stuff I could put on this CV. And first version was way too long, obviously, and worked with friends and advisors to cut that. And at the senior leadership level, they're looking for something that's a page.
Yeah.
And they're really only interested in your last 10 years.
Yeah.
And then they're only interested in what have you done? What value have you added to the business? It's not a technical, it's got to be the language that the business understands, right? Not the language that an engineer would understand. So you're really thinking about what kind of impact did you have out there in the world, and what did you do? Not what did your team do, what did your company do? What did you do as a technical leader? What are you responsible for? And it's about value. It's about shareholder value, ultimately, right? That you're demonstrating. And then it's got to be written in a way where a recruiter can read it and scan it in 1 minute and go, yeah, that's valuable. So your 10 years of blood, sweat, and tears It's shrunk down to a document that can be read in 1 minute by someone recruiting it.
and the recruiter has to, I think one of the counterintuitive things to Timothy's point, we're kind of, with respect, James, we're kind of trained to avoid recruiters, right? Because we're obviously busy with work. And then if we're not recruiting and you get these LinkedIn messages, the opposite has to happen. You actually need to spend quite a bit of time talking to the recruiter about your experience and your passions and the problems you solve, and then get their help to distill it down. Because when James and Luke and stuff are bringing me people, they're really pointing out, he solved this problem, he worked on this is why he's interesting. I have to admit, I've met several candidates without deep diving on the CVs, just based on those very brief conversations we're having about why I should talk to someone. Yeah,
that's true. I think the value of the CV is unclear, right? You need to have one, it needs to be good, but then it's not crucial. So this is
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, cool. So we've got quite a few lined up for James. I'll quickly just give one to Bill at the moment, because obviously I think James is hot stuff at the moment, but for one for Bill. Do you think you will hire a CTO before the lockdown is lifted and before you can obviously meet them in person? And do you think it will change the nature of the probationary period?
I think we'll hire, there could be a technical lifting of the lockdown by June, and we might not hire before that, but we absolutely will be able to hire in the next eight weeks or so. And we would hire without meeting the person, I think. And the probation period is a bit more complicated. I think really at the levels that we're hiring, the price points and such, we're making really comprehensive long-term commitments to someone. So we would do, I think, probably pretty thorough referencing, both with the support of Albany and our wider network. Our investor networks are well connected in a variety of technology companies here in Europe and the US. So I mean, I actually think as a candidate, you should really demand that. You should demand that the hiring company really complete a very thorough reference, and because you're making this big leap without having met them in person. But yeah, I see no impediment to hiring during the crisis and completing the hire without ever having met someone in person.
Yeah. And just on the probationary period, do you think it will be longer because they're going to be working remotely than it would be? So traditionally it's like 3 months or 4 months. Do you think it would potentially be longer for you just purely because it might be harder to see the impact initially?
I mean, usually when we're chasing a candidate, it's we have made a mental decision that we really want them, right? And so, probation can be partially an artifact, right? Like, it's extremely rare, I think, at these levels. You've made a whole bunch of mistakes if probation is how you're getting out of a situation. So I don't think from our perspective we would be looking to extend that. We would be doing the work, the groundwork, to really get to know them up front, and probably we would ask the candidate to meet way more of the team remotely, and that could be a burden on them than we might beforehand. But I don't see us making a change to probation. And again, I think at this level, you really need to, you should exercise some caution if probation is a way that they're trying you out. We're talking about CTOs here, not junior engineers and stuff like that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, then. So the next highest voted question for James: do you see more CTOs out on the market as an effort of fewer companies hiring, or more companies folding and/or breaking ties with contract interim CTOs?
I would say we see more candidates on the market because of industries struggling and people making either redundancies or changes to the team. So, but it's probably a combination of all those things. There's definitely an influx of candidates in the market, and there's definitely a decrease in roles. So that we put that down to that they typically follow investment cycles, and the investments are down in those markets.
Okay. Sure.
Brief answer, but
I mean, I guess our investors are super bearish, and we're doing really well in the crisis, but their long-term outlook about the economic situation 6 months or in 2021 is extremely negative, which is a bit worrying.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so this one isn't directed at anybody. What are the best team contingency strategies to think about right now, if fingers crossed not teams are impacted by the pandemic? So what will be the best team contingency strategies to go down? So who would like to take this one?
contingencies as relates to hiring, or as it relates to downsizing?
It's not been clarified. I think it's probably long-term strategy of the business, essentially, and potentially around the hiring aspect, about any contingency strategies around that.
I think it's important. Sorry, Timothy, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think as a candidate, you definitely need to get them to open up the books a bit and make sure that they are well run and well capitalized to survive extended downturn. I think that's an important contingency, right? Like, I think some real clarity into the ongoing financial performance of the business, how the short-term impact of the crisis has affected revenue acquisition, and what the cash runway looks like generally. I think if they're not willing to disclose that at scale, in some detail, I think that's an important part about trust that James and Timothy have been talking about. So that's one contingency. From our point of view, we've tried to organize the company to survive, right through to the end of, and thrive right through the end of 2021. I think it's fair to ask to see those plans, right? And what happens if you don't sell? What happens if there's a credit crunch? Of course, also what happens if it takes off, right? And like for us, we're going to sadly use the opportunity to hire strong talent throughout the crisis and that type of thing. The other contingencies are. I'm not too sure the exact scope of the question, but that's how I would think of them. Yeah.
Okay, great. And here's one question from another attendee. My feeling is that we're collectively not really great at hiring senior engineering leaders, nor interviewing them, partly because it was not something we practice a lot. Would that be a fair statement? What can we do as an industry to improve the process? Maybe James to start with, of your view from what you've seen.
Yeah, I'm happy to try and answer, but obviously we don't specialize in moving engineers, so it's a bit of a difficult one. How I interview candidates to whether they interview well will be determined by, their retention within the team, how well they manage the team, how large they've taken the team in various markets. So if they grew their London office. We do have lists of companies that we know have good engineering cultures. So where we see businesses that have hired well, and Glassdoor reviews, we obviously have a look at to see how well they hire and what their engineering staff say about them as individuals. But hard for me to comment on how to interview engineers, because that's not something we focus on.
Sure. Timothy, you've got thoughts on this at all?
Yeah, so I think being hired for a leadership role right now, in the process of being hired for, it's difficult. I think the table stakes are pretty big, and getting it right is hard. But I think part of it is understanding, being really clear. If you don't have a really effective, so if you're thinking about, roles shy of VP of Eng, you're down a head of engineering manager, tech lead sort of roles. Part of what you need to have in place is a good understanding of your organizational design and the roles these people play in the organization, and have a good feel for that, right? They're never really perfect because everyone brings what they bring to the business, and you need to kind of work with that in terms of constructing the role. But if you don't have a good understanding about the structure of how you're delivering and the design of your organization and the roles these different people play, it's going to be very hard for you to measure their ability to do the job. So you're going to be kind of looking for something amorphous. So write a good job description. Be clear about the role. Think about, and then just like with an IC role, when you're interviewing them, interview for the things you need them to do. Don't interview them for the things they're not going to be doing, right? Yeah. That's, I think, really I think for a lot of leadership roles, it's going to be about fit. It's not going to be about ability. It's going to be about, do they fit your culture? Do they fit the mission and vision of the organization? Some of the technical ability may be really relevant, especially if it's like a tech lead role or maybe an engineering manager role. But when you get up to head of or VP level, it may be, again, as Bill was describing before, your ability to help guide technical decision making may be more valuable than your technical knowledge itself. So, I think it's overthinking the problem that gets people into a lot of trouble here. Simplify it. And if you don't have a good org design or good understanding of the role, you're going to be interviewing candidates trying to get them to solve that problem for you. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So as we're coming to the end now, I've got one last question with the most votes. I think it's quite a quick one. And it's just moved off my screen. Okay, so what's your take on taking a slightly lower level role in a major corporate during this time with the intent to move to the level you should be at 1 to 3 years? Would that damage your career or be acceptable? Timothy, what would your view be on that to start with?
That's the abyss I'm staring in right now. Absolutely staring into that abyss. Yeah, I am interviewing for a few interesting roles. One of them is with AWS, and in that is kind of some of the things I'm trading off in my head is, how long will this process take to find the role I want versus how much should I be just trying to find a safe haven to weather the storm? And how much would that damage my future prospects? I'm not sure. I think part of it comes down to your attitude about what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. If you feel like the market's going to come roaring back and that the demand supply curve will change back to the way it was a couple of years ago, where there's a real need for technical leadership and there's not enough supply, then I think it's probably a safe thing to do. If you feel like this is a long-term drought is on the horizon in terms of these roles, then you probably need to fight a little harder right now to get the job. And then, but yeah, I don't know the answer. It's the real honest truth.
I have a view to that. So, I mean, literally a call from somebody who was offered a job and wanted my advice on whether to take it or not. And that was a classic, a role. He said he'd been there, done it before. It was offering a good 200K plus salary, great job, was secure, well invested. And he said, I'm just not sure. And advice to that is, will be dependent on the candidate I'm speaking with. If I'm really, if somebody is struggling to find an opportunity, then maybe it is the right place to go for a period of time, and it won't reflect negatively. But if you're a candidate that's got a good history, you've got good experience, then I would hold on for what you need. Obviously, your own personal circumstance dependent.
I think we're losing you a bit at the moment, James, I'm afraid.
Glyn, I would say to that, I do find it useful or helpful from my own sort of learning point of view when a candidate does have some big company experience. I wouldn't discount that out. To Timothy's point, AWS and a few others excluded, I would make really sure that big company isn't going to be subjected to other price pressures, right? Other economic pressures, because you could, who would have thought that joining an oil company might not be a stable job, right? That type of stuff. I think there are some risks there too, where the mercurial strategies can shift inside these big organizations. But obviously, the stability of a highly stable tech company is appealing, and if you think you can learn something there, that's only going to look well. And I think startup momentum 1 year, 2 years out is still going to be very strong. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. All right then, guys. So we've just gone over the hour now. So sorry for doing that. Essentially, you've all been fantastic. It's been very, very informative for me. There are a few more questions. If people want to reach out to you individually, like on social media, any recommendations, James? Where can we get to you?
I'm hoping that my that's allowing me to leave my number. You can Albany Partners UK.com. You'll find us. But if not, reach out to any of the people on this call and they'll have my details. But I'm really happy to answer any questions, whether that's relating to a search now or in the future. And it's been a genuine privilege to speak today. So thank you very much for the invite.
Excellent. And Bill, if someone wants to apply for the role that you're looking for, or to contact you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, also Twitter, WF Dobie. Definitely talk to me, talk to James. We're interested and we're hiring, as they say. And it's been really enjoyable. And I think how lucky we all are that we're in a situation where we're talking about roles and opportunities in this crisis. So thank you for asking us to be here.
Great. And Timothy?
Yeah, so best way to find me is on LinkedIn, Timothy Kimball. happy to talk to any other fellow job seekers, or of course anyone who knows of any opportunities out there. Love to know about them. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, yes, and of course, we're all available on CTO Craft apart from James. So essentially, so do reach out to us there. The next event we've got is on uncertainty. It's another CTO Craft Bytes again. I've just put the link in the session here for you to be able to go to. And thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. So look forward to seeing you all on Friday. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.